What's up, everyone? Welcome to Upload VR's review discussion of Iron Man VR, Marvel's Iron Man VR. I am Jamie Feltham, your senior editor. I am with David Jagnew, another senior editor.
How are you doing?
I'm good, David. I'm good. How are you?
I'm Iron Man, so I'm great.
Yeah, Iron Man is always great, as you will learn in the game Iron Man VR. David, you've played Iron Man VR. You've done all of Iron Man VR. You've reviewed Iron Man VR. You should be able to read our website. No, well, you should be able to read our website. Yes, the review on our website live now. You gave it a
Upload
4 out of 5.
up uploadvr.com for everyone in case you're unaware.
Oh yeah, we
Yeah,
write for our
yes.
website.
I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. A
Mm,
great
great on our new
rating.
review scale.
That's right. That's right. With a silver flowery banner on the score, the second highest score we can give a game.
Yep.
I really enjoyed it. I was skeptical when this game was originally announced. I think a lot of people were because it was kind of sandwiched between a bunch of non-VR announcements, and it seemed like a throwaway kind of like tie-in sort of gimmicky game that would just be kind of like, oh, go fly around, save a plane here, go fly around,
Mm,
shoot some drones, maybe an hour too long, then you're done. But that's not what this is at all. This is a AAA quality action game that is it's a linear story with missions that go in order with the story that goes from point A to point B. There's not like a branching narrative. It's not open world. It's very linear, very action packed, but it is a fantastic game. I really enjoyed it. I think people that like Iron Man, that like superheroes, that enjoy story driven games are gonna have a lot to like here.
I just noticed that you have a green T-shirt, so that might affect the Chroma King. But we'll find out if Iron Man VR shows up on your T-shirt later on when this is live on YouTube.
It's
Anyway,
not it's not bright green though, is it? Isn't it?
no, it's
It's
a
kind of
darker
a
green,
brownish green.
a
Yeah,
brownish green. You might get away with it. We'll see. It'll be
we'll
fine.
see. We'll see.
I think the point about this being a AAA story-driven game is really interesting because there are two sides to Marvel games usually, right? There's the kind of mobile side, if you will, of like Marvel Future Fight and like the MOBAs they do and everything like that, which
Yeah.
is this kind of very general,
Strike
like,
Force.
yeah, exactly. And you get like this base overview of like a whole bunch of different characters, but the gameplay is never really especially deep, specific to one
Yeah,
character,
I
right?
would say even Ultimate Alliance falls into that category.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Or Powers United, the other VR Marvel game.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day, Marvel Powers United, the Avengers game, and Marvel Ultimate Alliance, they're essentially the same game, just in different
Oh
perspectives.
yeah. They're almost
Anyway,
identical. Yeah.
yeah, they are. And so, but this is much more along the lines of the kind of Spider-Man game we saw on PS4. Obviously, it's nowhere near as long. Production values aren't quite as high because, you're dealing with the challenges of VR on PS4. But you're right in saying that it is like a good, solid, I would say maybe like anywhere between 6 to 10 hour game, depending on the difficulty you're playing on how many extra missions you do. And the thing that really struck me about it was, and the thing I want to talk about most was the developer Camouflage is a very story-driven developer. Their kind of credits include, well, Ryan Payton over there used to work on the Metal Gear Solid series, for example, and that's all about story. And then
Hmm.
they did Republic, which was kind of like a mobile, narrative-driven mobile stealth game, which had David Hayter in it, and again was very much channeling Metal Gear. This really feels like a very, very interesting and compelling take on a character that obviously for 10 years now we have seen explored so much in so many different directions, both through movies and then through the increased popularity in the comics. And I really feel like they find new ground to explore with the character here, not just in terms of the narrative, but also because you are in VR, right?
That's a really good way of putting it because my entire knowledge base on Iron Man comes completely from the cinematic universe, the movies.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Iron Man 3. I think that is the only MCU movie I haven't seen actually. I don't know why, I just never saw it.
Oh, that
Um,
explains why you didn't get some of the references in the game.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so other than that though, MCU is that's all, that's where my knowledge of Iron Man comes from. So going into this game, I my image of Iron Man is like Robert Downey Jr. It is, like a very charismatic, witty guy. It's a very like, so they capture some of that same ideas because that is
Mm,
the core of the character. Like if you were to boil him down to his bullet points, they still hit all of those things,
yeah,
but the voice actor for Tony Stark, Josh Keaton, does an incredible job. I mean, he
yeah, for sure.
is his own version. He doesn't have the same, cadence to the way he talks. He doesn't have the same degree of witty remarks. They're a little more, in a way, kind of comic book, friendly in a
Yeah,
way,
for
like a
sure.
more
Yeah.
cartoony version, which I think it works really well. I think it leaves room for you to sort of embody that character more because he's not constantly talking and monologuing. There's more, short one-liners here and there.
Mm.
So I think it's a good balance, and the supporting cast is amazing as well. Jennifer Hale as Pepper Potts was excellent. I just don't think they used her enough. She wasn't in it near as much as I was hoping she would
Yeah,
be.
Pepper gets kind of like the short straw in this one for sure, which is a
Yeah,
big shame.
yeah, yeah. But all the other characters are fantastic. The two AI assistants and the villains, everyone did such a good job. I mean, in a lot of VR games, I feel like you're so in the moment. The gameplay is so interactive and so visceral. Like you almost ignore the story in a lot of VR games. Like if
Yeah.
there's people talking, you just want to get back to the game. But this game had a great, great, great story, especially for someone like me that doesn't know the source material. So like these villains. I had never even heard of Living Laser. He was just revealed in the launch trailer.
Yeah.
I had never. All I knew about Ghost was from Ant-Man. I didn't even know that Ghost was an Iron Man villain. So
Mm.
this was like all brand new territory for me. And so the twist at the end, I did not see coming at all. It caught me off guard.
Mm.
I thought it was great.
Yeah, and again, like drawing back to that Marvel Spider-Man PS4 game, which must have been such a huge inspiration for the kind
For
of liberties
sure.
they could take with the source material. They do some really really interesting things, and they do call upon some of the really classic comic book stories. Demon and Bottle being one of them, but they
Yeah,
don't.
that was one of the ones that they mentioned to me in the interview a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and so I mean, that story is all about Tony Stark's alcoholism, and they don't
Hmm.
directly repeat that because obviously that's kind of very taboo ground, especially for a game that's meant to be showcasing being Iron Man in VR. But they extract elements from all these different stories in really really interesting ways, including the ending, which without spoiling anything, because this is a spoiler-free cast, draws on one of the more recent Iron Man stories in quite a surprising way, I think. I do want to talk about those AI characters because they play a huge, huge role in the
Yeah,
game in
yeah.
ways that I wasn't expecting. One of them is Friday, which obviously everyone knows from the movies, and then I think we're allowed to talk about, and this happens if you've played the demo. The reveal of this character is in between the two segments of the demo, so it's right at the start of the game. So I don't think we're spoiling too much, but there's another AI
Yeah,
in
I
the
think
game
he's
called
he's introduced at the end of the prologue. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
He's called Gunsmith, and he's essentially Tony's AI from back when he was a weapons dealer. Um, and he comes into the story in some really, really interesting ways. And I think that's where they get a lot of the really interesting self-reflection on the character as you go through the story. They find a
Mhm,
really,
mhm.
really, really interesting, fun way to communicate with the old Tony Stark essentially in this. Which the whole big thing about Tony is that we meet him as he changes into the person he becomes for the rest of the MCU. He turns in like he has like this kind of miraculous turnaround as a character, but we get to explore some of him before that in a really, really interesting way. I think the job they do with Friday and making Friday a character rather than just that, a replacement for Jarvis like she was in the movies is really, really incredible. They give her a full body, and she
Yeah,
has way
yeah.
more physical interactivity in Tony's world than she would in a movie, and has her own person, like way more of her own personality. Tony's clearly, engineered these AIs to be way more self-thinking than they are in the movies, and I think it's a really, really smart way to
Yeah,
inject
one
some new
one thing
characters
that
in there.
I was incredibly impressed by and surprised by is throughout, all the missions, throughout the entire game, I think I maybe heard only one or two lines repeated. from a
Yeah.
character,
Yeah.
even like during combat. Like the quips were very context driven. Like the enemy that I was fighting on that level at this stage of the fight would have a specific quip from Friday or from Gunsmith or from Tony that was
Yeah.
like custom tailored. Like it felt like, it was a great, like a quick one line joke that made me laugh, and I never heard it again. Like it wasn't reused dialogue. So I think they did a really amazing job with that, because it added so much life to the characters that there would be full on conversations happening while I'm fighting, or while I'm talking to a villain. I'll have the AIs, inside my suit arguing with each other. And it
Mm.
was just, I think they played up that element of, like the demon and the angel on your shoulder aspect of the two AIs, vying for your moral compass and trying to shove you in one direction and the other. And it just, they did such a good job, and it was like a believable ebb and flow to things. It was very
Yeah.
convincing. It wasn't like all of a sudden a huge, out of nowhere something happens, and oh, now Tony's bad guy again. Now he's gonna do this and do that, and like it was a great character arc. Like they did a really really great job. And shout out to Brendan Murphy, I believe is the name of the lead writer on
The
this.
writer, yeah.
Oh, someone else that I interviewed a couple weeks ago. Kudos to him. He did a great job.
Yeah, there's clearly a lot of love for the comics in there. They also brought in Christos Gage, who's a Marvel writer, to like add some kind of Marvel touches. I read, which is he did a great job as well. Going back to what you were saying about the characters talking while you're in the middle of combat, did you also get one of those weird kind of interesting, potentially unintentional VR side effects that I was kind of talking along to Friday and Gunsmith as I played? Like she would tell me new enemies are in the area, and I'm so stressed. I'm like, yeah, I can see that, and that's a very like it's a very natural thing to be doing, but it's also like you kind of do it in any game, but because it's an Iron Man game and because you're Tony Stark, it actually is like this kind of weird extra bit of embodiment that I really felt like I was doing all the kind of sarcastic quips in a way.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact joke, but there was a moment where I made a joke and then Tony said almost the same thing.
Oh
It was
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the same type of joke, the same exact line of thinking, and I was just, it was so funny because, it just felt so appropriate. I know that for me, like whenever I'm playing a VR game, usually I prefer the main character that I'm playing to not have a voice,
Yeah.
because in VR it's so much more immersive, and you are embodying that character. Like your head is their head, and it just, to me, it takes me out of it if I hear a voice coming out of my face that isn't my own.
Yeah.
The one exception to that was Asgard's Wrath, because technically you're possessing characters as a god, so it makes sense that they would still talk while you're possessing them. But in this case, I was okay with it, and I think it's because it was Tony Stark and it's Iron Man, and it's
Mm.
like it's almost like a a tour of what it would be like to be Tony Stark in a way. Kind of
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, like this is, if you were him, this is probably what you would say and do and think, and kind of showed you almost like what it would be like to be him. And so I think, I don't know, maybe it was just because it was so fleshed out in this case that I didn't mind.
You're right. You're right that it does still feel weird. It does still feel a little disconnected. And there are some dialogue options in the game, though they don't have a huge impact
Mm-hmm.
on what unfolds. But I guess it goes back to that idea, like you say, of this is much a Tony Stark simulator as it is an Iron Man simulator. And
Yeah,
the whole
yeah.
thing about Tony is he has this really, really quick brain that comes up with these references that as a critic I would love to be able to think of straight away as well, but I can't. And so his brain is just better at this stuff. So you kind of need Tony to be doing it. Without him there, it would be even weirder than it is right now, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. I mean, it'd be kind of like Spider-Man. Spider-Man's kind of similar. Like, could you imagine playing a Spider-Man game that doesn't have him like making funny jokes and stuff while he's
The com-
fighting, and
the completely silent Spider-Man.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. No.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So getting on, I mean, the story really is fantastic and I would love to talk more about it, but I don't want to spoil anything, and we might
Yeah.
potentially be doing a spoiler cast with Ryan Payton from Camouflage next week, hopefully. So we'll get more into it then, hopefully. I do want to
Yeah.
spend a lot of time talking about the gameplay though, because for me, this is one of the most well thought out, intricate, and enjoyable combat systems I've seen in VR by quite some way, I think. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean it has the benefit of um, there's nothing else like it. Like
Yep.
there is not a single comparable experience in terms of embodying a character and the things that they thought of to do to be able to let you fully control Iron Man is pretty impressive. And
Mm.
I like to think of an example of like Batman Arkham VR. That's a game that it feels like they either couldn't figure out how or were afraid to let you actually be Batman.
Yeah.
It's more of just like almost like a tour of like different areas, but you don't get to actually move and control and be
It's
Batman. But in
it's this
this case,
detective
like
side.
yeah,
Like
but
you do all the kind of investigation and you get to meet some of the villains up close, but when it comes to the combat, yeah, it was early
hmm
days for VR and they clearly looked at that and said, yeah, we don't want to go there right now.
So I think in this case, it's kind of surprising. Like it's shocking that this is a VR game that lets me fly through the air at 200 miles an hour, and I can fly with one hand, and I can shoot at enemies, and I can switch weapons, and then I can like hit the brakes and do a 180 real quick. I can go up and fly down and go all around, and I
Mm.
mean it's liberating. That's the best way to describe it. Like
And
it's
it's not just, it's like all those things are really, really, really great. And they work really well, which is really surprising on the PlayStation Move. But it's also like
yeah.
they have just this really great like pace and flow and connection with like the kind of satisfaction you get from watching Iron Man blast off in the movies. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely in there. And it comes from this really intricate combat design, which is like every enemy in the game, they clearly telegraph their move, whether it's like a projectile weapon that's this giant orb coming at you at like a kind of manageable speed, or some of the bigger drones do like a laser beam that even if they're firing from behind, it kind of projects the angle it's coming from. And that's
Mm-hmm.
basically telling you when you need to dodge right with both your repulsor blasts, which is a double tap of the trigger button on the move controller. And it feels so damn good to just narrowly avoid an incoming attack like Iron Man, then like
Yeah.
lower your fist down to bring up your auxiliary weapons on either of your wrists, and then
Yeah, I
fire like a
think
bunch of missiles.
if for me like the most satisfying thing to do is those enemies that you're describing that are kind of like a almost like a Venus flytrap that opens and they charge the
Mm-hmm.
laser, and
Yep.
right before they shoot it, I boost forward underneath them and then like go into hover mode so I start drifting and then I turn around and hit them with the missiles from below.
Oh, it's
Like it
so good.
just it feels so
And
satisfying, and
it's
then you see the explosions, and usually you catch like another one or two drones in that explosion at the same time. Then you can look down and do a ground pound and knock the tank up in the air in slow mo, punch it out of the air. It's just, oh, it's so good.
it's there's so much like almost connective tissue to it, right? Like every move you do can like naturally progress into something else that feels just as cool and just as cinematic. And it reminds me in a way, and this is the game I boringly always touch on, but it reminds me on the way in a way of Resident Evil 4, and the way that everything in Resident Evil 4 had calculation and pacing behind it,
hmm
and there was a natural way to react to everything. And that's very, very, even though like, Resident Evil 4 was a tank control game and it was restrictive and limited, and this is the complete opposite end of that. This is 360 degrees of movement, go wherever you want to go, how fast you ever want to go, whenever. It
hmm
works. It comes off incredibly well and is incredibly coherent, I think,
Yeah,
as much as it can be, because let's be
yeah,
honest,
yeah, yeah.
the move controllers
I was
are
about to say
problematic.
it's definitely limited by the platform.
Yep.
Because with the move controllers, like you have the four face buttons, right? So you have square, triangle, X, and circle, and then you have the triggers, and you have the actual middle move button, is what they call it. So those are
Mm.
your like six buttons. And to shoot, you hold your hands up and push the move buttons, or you point your hands down to do your auxiliary weapons and push the move buttons. And then your actual boosters are the triggers. So wherever you aim your palms is where the boosters are propelling you in that direction. And then the face buttons is where it gets complicated because
Hmm.
the two top ones rotate you on both hands, so just whichever one you want to use at the moment. And then you actually have two that you hold down to make a fist, and then you have other ones that you press to hover, and then if you push two at the same time, it's your unibeam, and then like it's two other ones at the same time does a 180. So it's like it's just it's very confusing because there are
Hmm.
so many things that they can't do that they have to map to buttons, and that immediately makes it less intuitive when you're in VR. Um,
You
yeah,
never fully get the hang of it even by the end is one of the problems, and it is less to do with the game's design and more to do with the restrictions of the controller for sure. Like
yeah.
as used to it as I got, and I got so used to it that those combat encounters could feel incredibly intuitive and like they string together really really well. There would always be the time that I would mix up the repulsor blast with the thruster. I would do that all the time
Oh
throughout the
yeah,
game.
yeah, yeah. Because you and I feel like your finger, like if you're shooting something, you just want to pull the trigger instead of
Yeah,
press your thumb.
yeah,
And
for
so it's
sure.
just yeah.
Also, the move button is called the move button, so you think maybe that should be about moving, but I mean, I'd imagine there's some reason they didn't change that round. I wouldn't know. Hopefully, maybe they can change that by in a patch later on. That would be really
Yeah, I
good.
guess like if you think about pointing your palms, your index finger, like pulling the trigger in the direction you're pointing kind of feels pretty natural
Yeah.
as opposed to pressing the thumb down, I guess. I don't know. I think being able to switch that would be very helpful for a lot of people.
And I mean, this leads on to one of the last things to talk about, which is one of the more negative things, and something I'm going to write an article a bit more in depth about for this weekend. I think is that
It's offensive the how bad these are.
yeah. Well, so this as great as this game is, and you gave it a 4 out of 5. I could have easily seen this being a 5 out of 5 if it just had the benefits of what PS5 is going to bring at the end of the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah,
And that's not
yeah.
that's not even necessarily just from a headset perspective. Like if you take PSVR 2 out of the equation, just the increased horsepower of the PS5 and the SSD that's meant to reduce loading times, because loading times in this game are a real problem, I feel.
Disgusting. It's I think it might be the worst loading times I've seen in a game because
Yeah.
um it's not only the fact that they're long, it's the fact that you go to the garage, you set up your suit, you pick where to go, you hit a load screen. And then
Yep.
you do part of the mission usually, and then there's another load screen. And then you do the other part of the mission and then another load screen back to the garage. And
Yep.
it's just it's crazy. Like you spend I would say probably over the course of the whole game, I spent probably at least half an hour in load screens.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Probably,
sure.
I
And
would say. Yeah.
every time you die as well, you're going to be loading for another minute or two.
That's
And
true. Yeah.
it's just because this game is pushing what can be done with the PS4 and VR to the absolute limits, right? Like we saw with The Last of Us like 2 weeks ago, pushing like standard PS4s on TVs to the absolute limits, but also getting like really nice polished production. Here we're getting kind of janky looking environments, kind of small
Mm.
janky looking environments.
And this is something I forgot to touch on in my review, but did you feel like some of the environments, like the scale was off?
Yeah,
Like
I think
you'd
I
be
did
flying
actually.
around and like you would see a house that looks like if I could physically get next to that house, I would be the same size as a two-story apartment
Yep.
complex.
Yep.
Because they kind of make it look like a play set almost, like they look like toys.
Oh, did you notice in the Malibu thing, like the first like row or two of houses are nice 3D models, and then it's just Google Maps houses, like
Yeah,
completely flat for the rest of
yeah,
the viewscape. It's
melting clay. Yeah.
it's a real shame. Like this game, you kind of hope that Camouflage, while they've been building this, there's a PS5 remaster um being toyed away on in the background as well, because it's not just the loading, like the tracking in the game, which is something we haven't touched on yet, is amazing for PSVR, right? Like the
Hmm.
360-degree freedom that you get on the headset is unlike anything else that PSVR owners will have experienced so far. But
Yeah.
also, I showed you a picture, and I might include this in the article. After two play sessions, I took it off, and the wires on the PSVR, the two wires that are like kind of glued together, are in just this horrible mangled mess now. And I've had this headset for 4 years and kept it in pretty good condition, but two play sessions of this has just completely ruined it on that perspective.
Yeah, and I mean the game does a good job of trying to help you because there's a circle on the ground
Mm,
that shows you the center of your play space. If you're not facing the camera, there will be alerts in your HUD that feel like they are appropriate like UI elements that pop up and alert you. It's not like an intrusive image or something like in other VR games. Like it feels like Friday's like letting me know like, oh hey, turn around, sir, something like that.
yeah.
So I mean they do a good job of communicating it, but yeah, I mean at the end of the day, this. I honestly don't think this game was ever intended from the beginning to be a PSVR game. It seemed from what I heard whenever I talked to them, is it sounds like they were developing this game for PC because of the freedom of
Yeah.
movement and the 360 tracking, and then Marvel probably got wind of it. Whenever they went to pitch it to them, and they brought on Sony to try to get help funding it, and that's where this started. That's kind of where the ball started rolling. I think the game was originally designed for a 360 system because it would be silly to design a game like this from the ground up to be for PSVR just because of the limitations. But that's my
Yeah.
theory, at least.
Yeah, well, I do think there's a lot of that. There's probably a lot of truth to that. I think again, it was probably the case that the Spider-Man PS4 game gave Marvel the confidence to go back to Sony and say, "Hey, look, we've got this," because
Yeah,
Marvel
yeah.
obviously have been very proactive with VR as well. They did Marvel Powers United VR, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast with Oculus, and I'm kind of hoping there'll be a future for Iron Man VR as well. I wanted to go over some of the questions we got on Twitter
Oh
because
yeah, yeah. Good
we
point.
got a few. I've
Yeah, we
got.
did. So,
Oh, have you
oh,
got
go
them there?
ahead. Yeah, I've got them all right now.
You go for it. You've written them out. I'm just looking at my phone.
One of the first ones we got was someone wanted to know if it ever stopped feeling incredibly janky to aim and move at the same time.
If you felt that from the demo and it put you off, I wouldn't say you'll find a miraculous difference in the main game. But having said that, like I never. I mean, it is janky. It is janky for sure, but I find it easy to look past some of that.
Yeah, I think mechanically it's sound. It's more that you get used to the way that it works. Like, uh, whenever I talked to the developers, they likened it to how you have to get, like if you were Iron Man, you would have to get used to flying the suit.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
for sure.
it's just you have to actually think about things in terms of physics and momentum. Like wherever you point your palm is the direction the thruster is going.
Mm.
So you're going to go in the opposite direction. So you just have to get used to angling your palm correctly when you fly, and then angling the other one correctly when you shoot. Like it's just, I don't know. I feel like you get used to it over time.
It's like learning to ride a bike with complex
Mhm.
buttons on the handles.
Mhm. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And
One of the other questions. Oh, go on.
well, to that point, I just wanted to talk about the difficulty a bit as well because you played it on normal, I played it on Invincible, and I have to say on Invincible, the game is like brutally difficult, and the checkpoints are way too spaced out. There's one mission where you have to do 5 waves of enemies, and in hard mode, it's like a 10 to 15 minute battle to get to the fifth wave. And if you die, you just have to go back to the start again and
That's
like
rough.
watch the
Yeah.
cutscenes again. I loved playing on hard because like I said, I think that the combat is intricate and stable enough to have a lot of fun, exhilarating combat
Yeah.
in there.
Very
But
satisfying.
yeah, for sure. But also, if you're easily frustrated, maybe stick with the normal mode.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, um, I usually just play games on normal, to be honest. But especially in a case where I get review code that doesn't come in until Monday night, and I have
Oh yeah,
to binge through a game, I just decided to go normal. And I felt like it was still. I would say that there were moments I felt challenged. I never died,
yeah.
so that's one caveat. On normal, I didn't die, but I did feel like there were still challenging moments. Some of the boss fights were pretty tough.
Oh, some of
Just
the boss fights are brutal. Yeah.
yeah, from just feeling that overwhelming feeling, and Friday in my ear telling me like, "Oh, suit's critical condition," like blah blah blah. So I mean, it's you definitely get that same feeling. Like I remember from the movies, those moments where like it seemed like everything was going terribly wrong, and like he was free falling and the suit wasn't working, and like they have those moments in this
Mm,
game where you feel helpless
mm,
because it's almost like layers of interactivity where you have Tony Stark in the game who is controlling the suit, and then you're controlling Tony Stark. And so it's like if the suit fails, it's like multiple layers of failure that cascade down to your helplessness, and it's a really interesting feeling. And yeah, so that kind of wandered off topic of the question, but yeah.
My bad. I apologize.
No, no, I mean we both did. For the next one, this kind of relates to what I was just talking about actually, is do the holograms in the HUD do they get distracting? And I think initially they did for me, but you get used to them and you get used to, I guess, tuning out the ones you don't need at that moment. And I noticed in some cases that the HUD would actually expand outward, it felt like, to give you more field of view for when you're fighting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the design of it is absolutely incredible. I
Mhm.
genuinely didn't notice. It's funny when you say distracting. I remember in the demo they didn't tell anyone the unibeam thing was in there, right? Like, that was a secret thing hidden in the demo, even though it's right up there on the UI. And I
Mhm.
still never picked up on it there. I don't actually. The only thing I pay attention to in the UI is the health down at the bottom. It takes that.
Yeah, that and for me, I use the radar a lot on the top left. It would show you where
Oh,
enemies were.
that was pretty helpful actually. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
and I really liked at the bottom where your health bar is. There's a little paper doll of your armor, and it shows you where
Mm,
your hands are, which is
that's so
nice.
smart.
Yeah,
It's
it's
so
really
smart.
cool.
It's like it really helps you adjust in a lot of
Hmm.
really, really helpful ways.
So I guess to answer the question, both of us agree that it's not distracting. It's actually more
Yeah,
immersive, right? I think we would
yeah,
agree
for
it
sure. It's
improves
what you'd want
things.
as Iron Man as well. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it like if I'm putting on a VR helmet, like it almost like it makes it feel more appropriate. Because
yeah, for sure.
just as a point to point out here, this is a footage I have in my review. Whenever the mission begins, the actual helmet like closes down, and you see
Mm,
Tony's breath on the inside, and then
so
it
cool.
like goes in, and then the visor opens, and it's such a great effect. They did a really
Yeah,
nice
it's really
job.
cool. Yeah.
Next question is we got asked, is there a problem when turning fully around given the camera? So I think we answered that.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean it it's it works really, really, really well. There are going to be times it won't work really, really well. You get a little icon when the game thinks that you're wrapping the wires around you too much.
mhm, mhm.
It's also a shame. I would say it's also a shame you can't set your own Guardian boundary with it because the game has its own one set to what the PSVR can find. But also that doesn't really work in the context of your room. So I was bumping into stuff a lot more than I usually would in a VR game.
Yeah, yeah, and you can recenter it at any time, but it's still kind of imperfect.
Yeah, for sure.
Next question is, does it feel embodied enough, like you actually are Iron Man and not just controlling him? And I think that was implicitly answered pretty much
Yep,
in everything else.
absolutely love
Um,
it.
Yeah. Next question: how does it handle motion sickness? So this is an interesting
Yeah,
one because for me, I don't think I've ever experienced motion sickness. So I
ever.
don't. Yeah, never.
Cool. I want to call you David Iron Stomach. Anyway,
Uh, uh, uh. Yeah.
not
So
my
why
finest
don't
pun.
why don't you answer this one? Because you've been like some games trigger you. Like I remember No Man's Sky, you had to clear that teleport movement.
Yeah, generally, I'm pretty good with it. I use smooth locomotion most of the time. The thing that gets me is smooth turning. Just
Oh,
so
interesting.
I stick to snap turning, for sure. And this game has snap turning, which again, if the 360 tracking isn't working out for you, you can just entirely rely on that. It's a bit of a shame given the efforts they went to make this a 360-degree game. But I felt entirely comfortable the entire time. One thing I will say, um, I played the entire game standing up. You can also play it sitting down, but
I did
I ne-
too. Yeah.
I nearly fell over a couple of times. I don't know about you. Like when I
Yeah, because I feel like I found myself spinning more
yeah
rapidly than I do in other VR games. And
yeah
I don't know if it's just like the way the game makes you feel like you are actually floating in the air. Like it was
yeah
just kind of like it's almost like I underestimated my own like weight and mass.
mm,
Like I
yeah
would try to like literally spin and I hit my bookshelf a few times and yeah, I mean the game really, like, you get into it, like
Yeah,
it's definitely a game where you want to, those safety messages that appear at the beginning of a PSVR game, clear your surroundings, actually do those things because you will probably hit
for
something.
sure. Yeah. Have we got any more questions, or is that?
We have one final one, just a very to the point question. How long is the game and how is replayability? About 6 to 10 hours, I would say. I think for me, I estimated around 9. It might have been a little less, but that was including some of the like challenge missions and honestly just spending time in the garage, like playing the basketball mini game, lifting weights, tinkering with the armor. There's a lot of stuff you can do to get distracted. And after you finish all the missions, there is a post game phase where it sends you back to the garage. There are new challenges that open up, and there's some new pieces of content you can do, and you can replay every mission. So you can replay it, try to get a better score, on which there is an online leaderboard. Plus, you also unlock research tokens that are used to purchase new weapons and upgrades. So there's there is incentive to go back and redo things and try to do better. So there is some replayability.
Yeah, and it's so much fun to play that I'm definitely going to go back. I'm going to get the platinum in this game for sure. I think I'm going to play on normals. I'm going to play on normal, so I don't want to like jump off a cliff by the end of it. But yeah, so that's our take on Iron Man VR. Great game. 4 out of 5. I think it would have been 5 out of 5 if it wasn't for the technical limitations that kind of compound it a little.
I will say that for me personally, it was quite a bit better than I expected. What about for you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, it was.
Okay.
I was expecting kind of that level of Marvel Future Fight, Strike Force.
I was expecting something similar to Powers United. I thought it would be a more a less narrative wave shooter, basically, and there's a lot of story elements here. It is a very rich narrative game, so I think they impressed me.
Yeah, and it is, just to touch on it one last time, it is a bit like Powers United in that most levels are pretty open and you fight incoming waves of enemies, but the gameplay is just so finely tuned to Iron Man, you don't really notice like the lack of level design, I guess is the way to put it.
Other than the 3 or 4 boss fights, I think there's only 6 enemies.
Yeah,
I want to say.
But they just come at you in various combinations, essentially.
Yeah, and they mix them together well, and the environments are varied enough that it didn't feel too repetitive to me. So
yeah, cool, David. Thank you so much for being here. This has been Upload VR's review in discussion of Iron Man VR. Thank you so much for being here. If you like this video, tell us, because we might do more of those. This was our first one, and we quite enjoyed doing it. It's a good way to kill 40 minutes in an 8-hour workday.
You could say we did the Supernatural one, was kind of a review and discussion.
Oh, that's true. Go back and watch our Supernatural one as well. That was also very good. Just watch all the YouTube video content. It's great. Also, subscribe, hit our notifications button, read the website. Go back and watch the Upload VR showcase if you want to. If you've never heard of that before, Google it.
And every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, we have a live talk show here on our YouTube channel as well, the VR Download, where you can chat with us in the comments while we're on air talking about the latest news. And I'm sure you will be talking about Iron Man on the show later today if you're watching this on Thursday.
Yep. All right. It's time to take my hands, which have just appeared for the first time. Goodbye, everyone.